I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening and thank you all for coming. Start tonight with presentation.
No, well, it'll be
Okay.
yeah.
Student report, we'll start with 2A. Before we start, I just want to real quick make a note that we were going to have the auditors here, but they're going to be zooming in because of traffic and weather or whatever. So we will have them via Zoom when we get to that part of the meeting. So start with the student reports.
Okay, there's a lot to go, not as much as last time, but just a heads up. This past month, gymnastics began their season and has been mostly practicing and preparing for the competitive season. This past Friday, they hosted their first competition, the Becker Clinic Invitational versus Chaska and Chanhassen, Bemidji, and Wayzata. The girls did great and ended the night with a score of 136.8. They have put in a lot of hard work during the off season and are very optimistic to have a great season. GSA has been relatively slow this year compared to others due to most of its members being in theater and some members graduating, but they are still keeping the community strong and making it known to people that they are open and safe space for everyone. Robotics held team registration on November 14th, and they've been working on training in new members and completing off-season projects since then. This past weekend, they hosted a large training event called Jumpstart here at the high school with over 400 students and coaches from around the state in attendance. Multiple students presented and hosted sessions throughout the day. Girls swim and dive had 3 girls qualify for state, 2 divers and 1 swimmer. Divers Lauren Wolfel, a senior, and Carly Kirk both competed very well. Lauren finished in 8th and Carly finished in 9th in the state. Great swimmer Grace Mork finished in 14th in the 200 free and finished 8th in the 500 free. She also broke the school record during the state semifinals in the 500 free. Girls basketball started with 3 weeks of practice before their first game on Saturday. In their first game on Saturday, they lost to St. Peter, but are very hopeful for the rest of the season. Student Council has been spending the month planning events for the month of December and the holiday season. Speech held their first informative meeting this past Wednesday, November 29th, and they have a follow-up meeting this Thursday, December 7th, with practices to follow in the weeks after. Throughout the last couple weeks, wrestling has been getting prepared for their first competition on December 7th against North Branch and Monticello. The boys hockey team record is currently 2-1 with another good game scheduled for Tuesday night against Moose Lake area. The first week of practice was a lot of conditioning, while the second and third weeks have been working on systems and game plans. After a successful 2 weeks of practice and 2 scrimmages, the boys basketball team was able to go on the road and get a 17-point win in Wilmer. Impact players of the game were Nathan Weiss, Josh Crossgrates, Kai Blomquist, and Landon Peterson. The Becker dance team had a great first competition for Corey, placing in top 6 for all of their routines. Drama proudly showcased their musical performance of Bye Bye Birdie, and the turnout exceeded their expectations. A heartfelt thank you goes out to everyone who contributed and supported them throughout the production. Following the success of Bye Bye Birdie, they diligently dismantled the set in preparation for their next endeavor, the upcoming one-act play. Yearbook just finished their first deadline, and now they are working on their second deadline. They have had a few more freshmen and sophomores join them as well. DECA has been hard at work this past month planning DECA the Halls. Students have been planning, budgeting, and working with other businesses to make this event happen. Girls hockey has been focusing on practice and is very hopeful for the season. NHS volunteer hours for trimester 1 are due on December 8th, and now members are working towards their trimester 2 volunteer hours.
All right, in the upcoming month, in the next 2 weeks, gymnastics has their first conference meets, including an away meet in Cambridge, Isanti, and a home meet versus Princeton. Before winter break, they will finish off December's meets with another invitational hosted by Annandale. Robotics will be focusing on continuing to train new members and preparing for kickoff, the official start to their season on January 6th. Girls basketball is hoping to grab their first win against Annandale this Friday at home. They have many more games through the rest of the month. This month, Student Council will be selling candy canes during lunch to students and staff and hosting a food drive competition between advisories the week of the 11th through the 15th. They will also be hosting a door decorating contest between advisories. The winning advisory will receive a breakfast before winter break, as well as dress-up days for the last 3 days of school. Speech will be practicing as their tournaments will begin starting mid-January. Wrestling will travel to Brainerd for an individual tournament, which has some tough teams in it. They will then be heading to Rochester to compete in the Christmas tournament. They are looking forward to progressing throughout the season. As the month progresses, boys hockey will keep putting in work and competing the best they can. Boys basketball has 3 home games this week against Cathedral, Annandale, and Hancock. Dance team is hosting a conference meet on the 7th, competing at Eastview on the 9th, and they have another conference meet on the 19th at Zimmerman. Drama held auditions for the one-act play today after school, and they're thrilled to kick off practices in the following week. There's a lot of anticipation for the new production, and they can't wait to embark on this exciting journey with their dedicated cast and crew. Yearbook is excited to work with the new recruits and continue improving the yearbook. Archery is starting practice next week. Competitions do not start until January. It is unconfirmed, but it is said to be the largest archery program in the nation. DECA is hosting Deck of the Halls on December 20th at the Becker Community Center. They can't wait to see everyone at this event and how it comes together. They are also excited to begin practicing for the upcoming competition season. NHS continues to volunteer throughout the holiday season.
Do you guys have any questions?
Well done.
What's going on?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving on to 2B, Superintendent's Report. Jeremy?
The MSBA conference, everyone is registered unless you have notified Angel of not attending. January meeting, we will be posting the January meeting date as January 8th, if it's approved tonight, beginning at 6:30. This meeting will be the first Monday in January organizational meeting. I'll send some stuff out to you about that, where it's where you elect officers and board chair and those types of things. So there's a pretty good process in place by MSBA on that, so should be pretty good. And all of you went through it once already, at least. And then the legislative session will begin on February 12th and end on May 21st, 2024. This is about 6 weeks shorter, which is typical for the non-budget session. But it will be very busy. The budget forecast will be out on Wednesday of this week. This will be followed by the governor's budget in January and early February. And then there will be a supplemental budget based on that forecast. Policy and funding topics that will likely be discussed in some capacity related to schools anyway is SROs, pension, READ Act, per pupil formula, special education paperwork, and more. I've also reached out to our representatives and senator for just to kind of say, hey, if you need any information from schools on any of these topics or anything else related to schools, I'd be happy to supply you with that or get you somebody that can help you with any information that we need. So I think it'll be a very busy session. It sounds like, especially because it's going to be crunched a little bit shorter. I've heard anywhere from 500 million to 900 million in surplus budget again, but I guess we'll know more on Wednesday on that. And then there'll be another forecast in February as well. So that'll be the one that they'll utilize if they do any funding projects. But likely it will be one time type of expenditures.
Okay, any questions? All right, thank you, Jeremy. Moving on to committee reports. Activities Committee. Keith, is that you?
Yep, that's me. Met on November 20th, a lot of which was already covered by our student section over here. So, and actually did a much better job than at the committee at the activities semester. So thank you. A couple of notes of interest though. They are doing kind of an audit, or at least kind of taking a look at activities fees going up. They showed some kind of examples of where we sit, activities fees as far as sports and clubs. And we're at the bottom, I guess, of those lists. And I think, Kevin, they've probably reached out to you to kind of take a look at numbers on where they're at, seeing if there is a type of shortfall or something like that. So looking at if we raise fees, what do we raise them to? You know, because obviously we don't want to raise fees just to raise fees. So but more on that, I was surprised that we were at the bottom, you know, as far as what we charge for fees, but that doesn't change the fact that they are expensive no matter what, so, it is an investment, so we'll be looking at that. They also touched a little bit on, the fall academic probation numbers. There were a total of fall participants, 293. Students on academic probation, to start the fall was only 5. Students added to the academic, probation after midterms were 11, and then total participants on academic probation for the fall season was 16. So I think they do a really good job with that. I believe only 1 student was actually removed from participating. Really good feedback as far as the coaches getting involved, making sure they're having conversations with their student athletes and their teachers. And then grades are, again, always checked at midterms, and then those conversations ensue. And then again, other than that, those, the ladies covered it, so that was activity council.
All right,
Any questions?
no question. Ryan, you want to hit the P O C?
Yeah, so the transportation projects, there's still a few items left on the punch list. Looking at making a few changes, there's some condensation and heat issues in the restrooms, and then we've got a ship date for the generator for the end of January. So that's really about all that's left. The middle school, that really has come together nicely. There's very few things, very few punch list items. So basically just finalizing proposal documents for that. The high school, sounds like that's finally all coming together too. The CTE labs up and running, which was kind of a big deal. We're waiting on stuff for quite a while, so that's come together well. And then the intermediate school project, we're getting ready to start phase 2 coordination already, so it doesn't seem like that's possible because it's only December, but March will come quickly. And then if anyone's driven by and seen the ECFE building, that's really coming along nice. They're framing, putting sheetrock up, still on track to be done late February, middle of March, so nothing showing any signs of hanging that up either, so everything seems to be moving nicely.
I don't think there's any other. Right? Well, that one's probably going the smoothest of everything,
Yep.
and what a difference it makes it when you come from that side of town, what a difference that campus looks without the bus garage and everything there.
Mhm.
It's welcoming. So, any questions?
Oh, it's great.
All right, thank you, Ryan.
Yep.
Troy, do you have any committee reports?
No, I think we're gonna cover the curriculum
Curriculum, yeah.
later on, but
And so,
that's it.
last one I have is policy.
Yeah, policy committee did meet last Wednesday. Talk about a couple, the first 2 were just review only. Those were 413, the harassment and violence. And 416, drug, alcohol, and cannabis testing. And I believe that they were just reviews due to changes in state statute that were just being updated. So those were updated and are included here in the book for if anyone wants to review. And then we also touched on policies 505, non-school sponsored material, and 470, the political campaigns. We discussed it in committee. We feel that it's important that we get those 2 right. Make sure that we continue to involve the community and get some feedback on those before pushing anything through. So we extended public comment on that and research for another 30 to 60 days as we move forward and look at those. So we'll continue to work and come up with the best options on that.
Is there any other committees that I missed? All right, move on to item number 3, consent agenda. Entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to accept the consent agendas.
I'll second.
Troy has a second. Are there any questions or discussions?
I did see we did hire some quality long-term sub administrators to take.
Yeah, we do have a couple of administrators out and we were able to fill their positions with subs. They've been doing well.
People,
They'd come highly recommended.
yes.
All right. Call the question to approve a consent agenda as listed before us. All those in favor say aye. All opposed, motion carries. Was on item number 4, gifts.
Make a motion to accept.
I'll second.
Any questions or discussions on the gifts?
Just the only one that was a little bit with Blattner Construction, so they have a extremely generous gift. It was for improvements out at the softball complex. Do we know what those improvements would be?
Not at this time, we don't. They're working on a plan
Okay,
to kind of use some of this money and some other donations that they've received recently. And some of their, I think the Blast has some money that they're looking to donate as well. So they want to combine all those to make some good improvements instead of trying to piecemeal something together. But not specifically yet.
just curious on what they would do. Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, extremely generous as usual.
Absolutely. And shout out to the Becker Lions too, for their donation to the DCFE playground. I know that they're over there just, they're just working the streets, working the doors over there to put the best playground possible out there, so. It's very much appreciate all the gifts, no doubt.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of accepting gifts as written before us, say aye. All opposed, motion carries. Brings us on to item number 5, the world's best workforce report summary. Jeremy, you want to speak to this?
I'll actually defer to the curriculum committee if you want, but they just had a meeting and a presentation on this. I went through the world's best workforce. One of the things I do struggle with is it's weird timing when the world's best workforce report has to be approved. Because we're working on, it's kind of a weird timing, working on goals from last year and creating goals for this year at this time, so. But anything else that,
So you have the report in front of you, but kind of, I think what Jim was alluding to the two is that they're all past goals. How we accomplish those goals, where do we fall in those? Do we meet our goals? Do we not meet our goals? Where do we fall short? And then some of our goals that are moving forward then would be the ones that we need to kind of correct those and or to improve on those. So if you're just kind of going through, we can just kind of real quickly, what we're looking at is our all students are ready for school. I think that's kind of alludes to kind of our wonderful early childhood and things of that nature. It was 80% of our kids are ready to go. Their scores came in at 86%. Which means we met our goal there, and just kind of knowing for you in the future, they've actually bumped it up now for 85 for the next standard of time. If you guys are following along, we can kind of keep rolling. If you have questions, stop and ask. So the next goal that was there was all 3rd graders can read at the grade level. This actually is changing to all students can read at grade level, so it's kind of going to be as a statewide thing. So a READ Act was going there, but you can kind of see where we're at on this one. We did fall short of this a little bit, and so kind of some different policies that are going on. We have some different curriculum that was introduced, some different strategies and how to implement and to make sure that our students are reading the best that they can.
And we did discuss this one a little bit because was a miss for the 3rd grader reading, and something that was obvious if you think about it, but surprising if you don't, is this year's 3rd graders were kindergartners during COVID. And so there's
Still in that.
Yeah, seems like there's probably some pretty good impact there.
The next goal that you can look at is our economic achievement gap. So what they look at is our students that are on free and reduced lunch compared to our students that are not. Are we shrinking that gap between the performances on MCA data? And you can see that the school district did meet that goal as well. Fourth goal that they looked at was the achievement gap between our special education population students and again our mainstream or regular education students. Again, trying to shrink that gap there as well. And you can see by data, MCA data again, that was not a goal that they met this go around. So things can work on understanding where that goes. And the fifth, second to last is our career, or all students are gonna be career and college ready. They do this in a class, making sure that they have a plan in place. Each student has a plan in place, ready for this. And if they didn't meet that, you can see 100% of the students participated in that, completed a post-graduation plan. They're gonna look at. And the final one was, all students will graduate from Becker High School, and their goal was for 90%. Those are still pending, should have those results come more in January. I think probably for Troy and I both those know we're in education. It's surprising that it's not just our students that we see walking the halls, it could be students that maybe have left our building, that we still have to count and find out where it's at, how that works out too. So sometimes the graduation rate just isn't, hey, they had 210 kids in their class and somebody graduates, maybe what kids came and left during that time period too.
Yeah.
All goes into it. So that's a little bit of a different, but they all have, hopefully coming up here in January, February, they'll have those final results.
And I think that also plays into it, because I remember when we discussed this last time, it's like, why wouldn't the goal be 100%? Why is this goal 90? And it's because of the way they calculate it and the way it all goes in there, there's some things that are just out of our control.
Mhm.
And this is a 4-year graduation rate, and there's some, now it'll be longer, but there's a 5-year, 6-year, there'll be a 7-year graduation rate as well. So students that go to school till they're 21 or 22 now will play a role in some of that too.
Okay.
Was there any discussions on the downward trend of that?
I don't think we discussed that in this
Graduation
meeting, no.
rates in
The
general.
graduation rates, no.
I mean, the
It's-
state's pretty stagnant. We're getting closer to the state as the years go on, and it's.
It was brought up, yeah, like we have seen a little bit of dip. 2 years ago, we were under that 90%, alluded to like 89% or so.
No,
Not
no
necessarily a
specifics.
reason why, no,
So no specifics we'll back about why that might be a problem.
no. What we're approving is just that, those goals from those areas.
And basically the report on those
And the
goals.
report,
Report.
yep, report on those goals. If you have any questions?
No.
So obviously a lot of very good things that are happening and a couple things that will be addressed and have been addressed. And continue to be.
So, yeah. So when will those 23s be?
The graduation rate,
Yeah,
January,
January,
February, yeah.
so.
They were delayed last year, but yeah, I struggle with that too. I just don't get.
MCA's graduation rates, and like, how can those things not be here in August? I mean,
And it takes them March, April, May, of very end.
for MCA's, it should be here in June. So I'll entertain a motion to accept the report for the World's Best Workforce.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Brings us to item number 6, the fiscal year 2022 financial audit. Kevin?
23.
23, okay. You want to speak to that, Kevin?
Actually,
She-
that's where we're.
Is she on?
Nancy Schulzenberg, the lead auditor on our school district audit. I think Patrick's gonna
Time her in.
zoom her in.
Yeah, I am here. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yes, we can.
All right, good. So thanks for letting me join virtually, and thanks Jeremy for running the slideshow for me. I'm going to start out tonight by talking about some of the communications that we issue as part of the audit. So first of all, the independent audit report, which if you want to read it in its entirety is in the front of the financial statement document. But the second paragraph in that letter is the most important, and that's where you find our opinion. So what we're issuing for Becker Public Schools is an unmodified opinion, which basically indicates that our financial statements, your financial statements, excuse me, are fairly presented based on the results of our audit. So this is the clean opinion and the best that we as your auditors can offer. Next slide, we have a few other reports that we issue. So first of all, our report related to government auditing standards. So these standards are required for all school districts in the state of Minnesota. And it requires us to gain an understanding of internal control. We're not providing an opinion on that internal control, but we do have one finding, which is the lack of segregation of accounting duties. That's not new for Becker, not at all unusual for a district of your size, simply there because of the limited number of people that you have involved in your day-to-day operations. And then also related to those standards, we did not have any non-compliance that we noted related to contracts, grants, other types of agreements. So clean as far as the compliance goes. And then we have our report related to the single audit. So this is in accordance with uniform guidance or the federal requirements for your federal programs. And we did test 2 programs this year, the Education Stabilization Funds, or ESSER, as you're used to hearing, and then also the COVID testing program. And based on our work there, we're issuing an unmodified opinion on compliance, and we had no internal control findings as it relates to that compliance. So a completely clean report when it comes to your federal funds that we tested. And then our last official letter is going to be on Minnesota legal compliance. And this comes to us directly from the Office of the State Auditor. They're very specific about which statutes they ask us to test as they relate to accounting matters. And again, based on our work there, no compliance concerns. So no compliance findings, just the one internal control finding for the overall audit. And then we have a separate document titled Communication Letter. And in there, is the financial analysis that we will cover tonight. And then there are several pages titled Required Communication. So these are things that our standards require us as auditors to put in writing to you all as the governing body for the Becker Public Schools. So it would be our tool if we had anything significant that we uncovered in the audit, or if we had any difficulties, disagreements, anything that strays from the standards. And nothing did. So all of that in that section is our standard template language. And then in the back of the communication letter, we have a couple other things. There's the latest from the legislative session, the last session, a nice summary there. And then finally, some new GASB standards that are coming for the next couple of years. So moving then to the financial analysis, we start out with the formula allowance for general education aid, because general education aid is such a significant part of the revenues that you receive. It's important to understand the components of the calculation of that aid. So starting with that basic allowance for 2023, which is 3 numbers up from the bottom, you did receive 2%. We give you some perspective numbers there. So 2024, you'll be receiving 4%, and then 2025 back down to 2%. And then the other part of that calculation has to do with your student count. So we do have several charts and graphs to take a look at those numbers. And starting here, we have your residents in the top portion of the chart. So you can see residents were up about 15 students from 22 to 23. And not a big change when you go back to 2019 to 2023. There is a decrease there, but it's not significant. And then below that total resident line, you'll see a total adjusted ADM. So this factors in open enrollment and some of those tuition agreements, but does not weight those students. So you can see that number also increased just a little bit less, about 7 students for fiscal 23. And we have that same information in the graphical format on this slide. And here, I think it highlights the relative stability of your student counts over the 5 years that we're looking at, especially in the last 3 years. Not a lot of change going on there. And some fluctuations between categories, but again, nothing significant. So then when we actually calculate general education aid, we take those resident students, weight them by grade level, everybody at a 1.0 with the exception of secondary, those secondary students receiving 20% more on the formula allowance. And then we factor in open enrollment. So that's what the chart on the bottom here is doing. So we start with your residents weighted, and then we take a look at the residents that are going elsewhere and the non-residents coming into the district. And traditionally, you have had a net gain in open enrollment, and that continued for fiscal 23. It did decrease a little bit. You had more students going elsewhere, and then you also had more non-residents coming in, but at a lesser amount. So a decrease of about 10 related to that. But even with that factored in, you still did see a very small increase in your overall adjusted pupil unit numbers. That was up by about 13. Similar information here, also in a graphical format. On the left-hand side in the green, we have the adjusted ADM, so these are not weighted. And then on the right-hand side in the blue, we have the adjusted pupil unit numbers. So just kind of showing you the consistency overall in the 5 years. Moving then to some actual dollars, starting with your budget to actual report. So originally you had anticipated fund balance. If we're looking at the bottom line here, fund balance would go up about $14,000. You modified that budget, anticipating excess expenditures, and the result was a positive increase in fund balance of $1,267,000. So if we look at the far right column, that's going to be the variance column to tell the story of why you outperformed your budget. So first of all, revenues over budget about 0.8%. So really very close in total to what you had anticipated. And the largest variance did come in the other category, which includes the federal, the other local sources, including investment income. So investment income is where you saw the biggest amount over as the market conditions improved in fiscal 23. And then on the expenditure side of things, if we follow that down on the right-hand side, those were over budget 0.7%. So again, very, very close to what you had anticipated. And really the variance comes in several categories in salaries and benefits. So if we look at that excess revenues over under expenditures, $21,000 different from your budget. So almost spot on to what you had planned for the district. Below that, you'll see an other financing source line. There's $1,716,000 coming in there. That relates to an insurance recovery amount that came in fiscal 23, will be spent in future years. So it fell to the bottom line. And that created the over budget in total. Next slide gives us a snapshot of the general fund, really high level, and we'll get into the details of revenues and expenditures and the changes in those in the coming slides. But overall, just kind of wanted to look at the fund balance, so the bottom portion of this chart. So you can see all the different categories there, and the biggest change comes in operating capital. It was $78,000 last year, went up to $1.4 million this year. That again is that insurance recovery amount that is restricted for specific purposes. So that is included in that line item. The unassigned, which is 2 numbers up from the bottom of the chart there, did decrease about $485,000 for the year and represents about 8.2% of your expenditures based on 2023 budgeted levels. And your policy does outline a minimum of 8%. So you are still in compliance with that policy at year end. And taking a look at some of the details, sources of revenues to start out with. So overall revenues were up about 1.9%. So pretty consistent each of the last 3 years. When you look at that bar chart, there's not a lot of fluctuation there. And the blue in the middle, that represents your state sources, represents 73% of the total. So really heavy reliance on the state of Minnesota and the funding streams there. That category makes up most of the increased about 2.7% or 719,000. Came in the general education aid with that formula allowance increase and also the increase in students. And then you had an increase in your special education revenues as well based on student need. The local property taxes on the top in the gray and the other on the bottom in the green, pretty consistent year over year. Moving to the expenditure side of things then, expenditures were up about 5.3% or $1.9 million for the year. Most of that came in wages and benefits across all your categories. So same reason for the over budget. And when we look at your direct instructional categories, those make up 66 and 65% of the total respectively for 23 and 22. So most significantly spending directly on students. Then we have some comparative metrics on the next couple of slides. So first of all, taking a look at your revenues per ADM served with Becker's revenues being on the left in the green and overall statewide averages on the right in the blue. So you can see you've had minimal increases the last 3 years, just like your revenues, because your student count has been relatively stable and your revenues have been relatively stable. So is the revenue per student and consistently below that statewide average. So you can see on the right-hand side. And when we look at expenditures on the next slide, we see a very similar picture. So expenditures were up in 23 with the increase in your expenditures. But if you look at the prior years, you can see that consistency and also the amount below statewide averages there as well. And a little bit different look at those expenditures, taking a look at those pie charts, those percentages by program, and then comparing that to statewide averages for 22. We don't yet have those numbers for 23. So when we look at Becker versus state averages, you can see some categories have some variances. So first of all, district and school administration and pupil support services are under statewide averages. Regular instruction is the category that is most significantly over those averages. And then not significant variances when you look at 22 versus 23 for the district itself. The next slide is shows some general fund operations. Again, at a high level, so taking a look at net revenues, comparing that to expenditures. And back in 2019, the expenditures were outpacing the revenues. Each year since, you've had excess revenues, allowing the green, which represents the revenues, to be above the blue, which is your expenditures, allowing for that overall increase in fund balance. Another way that we can compare the district to state averages is by looking at your expenditures as a percentage of your fund balance as a percentage of expenditures, excuse me. So this is different than the 8% that I talked about when we looked at the general fund in total. This is unrestricted fund balance compared to unrestricted expenditures. So the state calculates this for us. This is what they use to calculate SOD, or statutory operating debt, for districts. And they subtract out those unrestricted expenditures to give us this percentage. So it's a little bit higher at 12.4% for fiscal year 23. It did drop a little bit from 22, where you at 13.5%, but again, pretty consistent the last 3 years. Below statewide averages, which typically hovers right around that 20 to 23 or 4%. And then one more slide on the general fund, which shows the improvement in the operations overall. We saw it in, starting out looking at that revenue expenditure chart. And again, it's highlighted here. Cash and investments and fund balance have been increasing for each of the last 5 years. And when you look at that variance, cash being on the top in the green, fund balance being on the bottom in the blue, the biggest difference in those numbers relates to July and August teacher payments, which are included in expenditures and subtracted from fund balance, are still in cash as those get paid in the coming months. And then taxes received in advance for fiscal 24, also in cash at the end of the year. Moving to food service operations, a bit of a change in this fund, back to more normal operations in fiscal 23. In 22, you had those full federal reimbursements for all students at a free level. So revenues were down about $729,000. Expenditures, on the other hand, we saw inflationary increases, additional meals served, so those were up about $173,000. So you did have excess expenditures for the first time in the 5 years that we're looking at here, ending your fund balance just over 1.1 million. So still very healthy at the end of the year. And then finally, your community service fund. This fund did have an increase in revenues and expenditures with increased participation in your programming. Did produce excess expenditures for the 5th year in a row. You did have a transfer in from the general fund to cover the deficit for your early childhood and family education programming, but overall fund balance was down about $86,000. And then we do have the categories listed below. You can see that your community education overall and also school readiness were in a deficit at the end of the year. And that's everything, but happy to take any questions you might have.
Nancy, I have a question on general fund. You said
Yes.
we're 8.2%.
Mhm.
What do you have an idea of what the state average is on that?
No, that's not something that the state puts out in any format, so we don't know exactly what that number is. But I do know that it's probably higher than 8.2%, just based on the unrestricted fund balance as a percentage of unrestricted expenditures. That being 20, all we'd be subtracting out are some assignments and non-spendables. So yeah, probably a little bit below, but I don't have any data to back that up.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much, Nancy.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks again for letting me join virtually. I appreciate that.
Oh, accept a motion to accept the audit as was presented to us.
Make a motion. Accept.
Second. Any questions or discussions on that? Pretty straightforward. All right, all those in favor to accept the audit as presented tonight, say aye. Aye. All opposed, motion carries. Moving on to item number 7, the real meeting for tonight's meeting. Kevin, truth of taxation.
And it's actually payable 24, not 23. And I saw we had a spelling error there. It's not payable, it's payable. So this is the finalization and final approval of our tax levy for payable 24. That starts way back in August and give all the information to the state. They do their calculation on I think it's 33 pages to a spreadsheet that they calculate. And you actually approve the preliminary levy in September. And then if you have any changes to it, the state might change some things, or if you'd have a vote, then that would go into this final. But this is the final presentation for the levy. Go on. What this is, there's a truth and taxation law, and there's really 2 parts to it. Counties send out the proposed property tax statements. You should have already gotten those in the mail, all residents. It's based on these numbers. And then the second part is you have to hold a hearing, which is really what we're in right now. This is the hearing. The next one, the hearing requirements, just that we present information on the budget, actual revenues and expenses for the prior year, which we kind of saw some of those just in the audit report, but you'll see them again here too. And then we also will show you what the proposed levy is and for approval at the end. And then if there are any public comments, we allow the public to comment. So going back, and this is a little bit of repeat from Nancy, but it's in a different format, kind of a whole higher overview, easier to understand. You'll see the top portion of this is the general fund. And you'll see that the top line is the total of all the fund. So we started out with a balance of 4.5 million. We had revenues of 39 million. We had expenditures of 37 million. We had a transfer out. So our variance was 1,267,596, of which most of that was that insurance that she was showing that will get spent now this summer on the primary roof. That was the insurance proceeds that we received. But just couldn't get to the repair of it until next year. Then you take out the capital reserve fund balances, and you'll see the first one is the operating capital. That's where you'll see that revenue of 3,059,000 that had that 1,700,000 of insurance in it. That's why that's so large at the end of the year, 1,453,000. Then we have, and again, this reserve is for only the operating type expenditures. So your equipment, your different things, your textbooks, those types of things are what these are for. They're usually for items that are going to last longer than a year. The long-term facilities maintenance is a second area, and that's really the larger repairs, like to parking lots, to roofs, the change out of the LED lights from the old ballast type to the LED part. So that's what this represents, and we get about $1 million, and we spend about $1 million in there. We are trying to save up a little bit in there and build that a little bit, because we do know roofing costs more than what they give us in 1 year. One roof would cost $1.5 million to do. So we are trying to build that up a little bit over the years, Rick and I, when we look at budgeting. Then we have a few restricted items. The first one is a scholarship. So we receive a scholarship. People donate money, say, okay, I want to give this to school for student scholarships in the spring. You'll see we got 2,000 last year. We paid out 3,250. Have a remaining of 5,500 left. Then we have a restricted for student activities, and those are for the students and run by the students, those student activities. We do 316,000 of revenues this last year. We had 349,000 expenditures, so that fund balance did come down a little bit. Then the third item is we have assigned balances, which are for building activities. They're really for site-based items within each of the buildings. This has some reserves in it for like playground. There has been some past money that the district has done fundraising on. So like, which will go towards the new playground in the ECFE in the primary area. But not all, there's all sorts of different site reserves there. And then the last one is the non-spendable fund balance. So all that is it's the inventories and the prepaids that we had at June 30th. You have to set them up as prepaids. They'll get expensed in the next year. So you can't spend it on regular expenditures because they're specific for the big one is our prepaid liability, property insurance, workers' comp insurance. So, and then that last item there is the unassigned. That's the one we measure ourselves by for that 8% fund balance. And so what you do is you'll just take that 3,075,000 divided by the 34,334,000 expenditures, and it comes to like 8.9%. Any questions on the last year's results? Okay, then this slide is the results for all the funds. And again, you saw a little bit of this in Nancy's, but you'll have the food service, the general fund in total, again, so it's not just the unreserved, it's the grand total. The food service fund, they do have a requirement in there that you can only have 3 months worth of expenditures in your fund balance, but they waive that for this year. So next year, we actually do have a spend down of that on improvements. We bought new serving lines. That's to the tune of about 300,000. So it will come down next year or the year we're in. And then you'll see the community service fund, it's down to about 160,000. I know Jeremy has talked to them about looking at their fee structure also to try to help that out. And in the building construction fund, that's the proceeds that we had for the projects that we're doing. At the end of last year, we had 40 million. We've spent down, we got some interest, 766,000, and we spent down 19 million. So we had a net drop of 18 million. At the end of June 30th, 2023, there was still 22 million left of the roughly 44 million. So we were about halfway at that time. Currently, we're down to about 11 million right now after all the projects are going through. And in our debt service, that's the fund that pays off the bonds. When you issue the bonds, you have principal and interest payments that pay it back. So the revenues are the taxes that we collect. The expenditures are the paying and the principal and interest on them. That went up a little bit in that fund. And if we get too large in that fund, the state does an adjustment and they bring it down. That you just can't levy as much. Then we take a look at the current year that we're in. This is our current year budget. This is what we had that you had approved back in May. This will also get revised once I know more new numbers as the year goes along. But if you look, we have operating capital that'll actually get adjusted because that beginning balance is larger because of the finance the insurance sitting in there. But the expenditures will go up too, because I don't have the revised budget in there. Long-term facilities maintenance, again, trying to build that a little bit for future building roof projects. And then you have all your other assigned and restricted ones, the scholarships. We don't really have any revenue estimates on those or expenditures. They come in during the year, a personal, give a donation, and then the committee that decides this of who gets the scholarships decides it in the spring. Student activities, we also just make an estimate of 250,000 on the revenues and expenditures. Once we do the revised, we'll have a closer idea that I'll adjust that. Same thing on those assigned. We don't really know how the site-based buildings are gonna do, so we really don't put anything in there for that. And again, the prepaids, same thing, we just match up the revenues and expenditures. Then you get down to that unassigned fund balance again, and the original budget shows a increase of 78,000. Again, once settlements are done, different things are done, then I go through, revise it, and that number will be different. I mean, I just know it will, always is. So, but initially, we're projecting an increase of 78,000. And then this is the same 2023, 24 for the total of the funds. So again, the general fund, roughly a $86,000 increase. Food service, there you'll see we're projecting a $262,000 decrease because we already got them, actually, the serving lines, we got them in August. So we know that that's gonna go down. The community service fund does show another decrease of about 80,000. And then the construction fund, as you can see, we'll spend most of that this year. What'll be remaining projected next June 30th will really be what's left to do at the intermediate school. That's the last project to get finished of the 4. And then debt service fund also, again, it's just principal and interest and the taxes coming in on the revenue side. Okay.
I just
Yep.
think that you make some adjustments to that, because you keep losing 80 grand 2 years out.
Yeah, well, that's why I said Jeremy is talking to the community ed people to take a look at their fees. And they're looking at that, what they can increase to and how much. And if the fees can't cover it, there might be some reductions in those areas too. And those are the only 2 spots you can go. Revenues, more revenues or less expenditures. Yeah. Okay, here's just pie chart for the 22-23 is an actual revenues, and then 23-24 is the budgeted revenues. So as you can see, the pretty close. For the state sources, we have an increase. That's the 4% that Nancy had shown up there on the general ed aid. There was also an increase in the special ed aid. So that's why that increased almost 2.6%, 2.7%. And then you can see the other areas, they just fluctuate because the largest one changes, the other ones change a little bit too, but fairly consistent on the other areas. And then we show the same thing for the expenditures. This just shows the different areas. And you can see the largest area where we spend is in the instruction, 66%. That you also saw that in Nancy's presentation too. This year, we're actually a little bit higher at 68%. Again, it's the settlements and other expenses in those areas. You have a little bit of increase in enrollment. You also have to hire new people. So other rates, they're all fairly close, not big changes. The reason probably the student support services is projected to go down is last year we still had a lot of the ESSER money yet, the federal ESSER money, and it's gonna drop about 200 and some thousand from last year to this year, and then you'll see that same thing happen next year, also next year's budget in 24-25. Because the ESSER money is finally all spent after this year.
How this district compares to other districts, percent basis.
They're pretty close. So like the instruction area, it's for the districts, when I used to audit, is right around about 65% to 68%. So, yeah. If you looked at that, you would see she showed the 2022, what Becker had spent the percentage on these same areas. Then she had the state average in the middle, and then she had 2023. So she had 2 years ago. Yeah, she had 2 years ago, and the one thing that I noted, that I'm just remembering, we're higher in the instructional area than the state average. That was the one that I noticed. So when you're asking about that, just look at that sheet and you'll be able to do the comparison. Yep. So again, where school districts get most of their money is from the state, as Nancy mentioned too. How the calculation works, it's that formula allowance. That was that first slide that she showed, the general education aid, where it went up 4% this year. It's going up 2% next fiscal year. So it's that formula allowance times the students, and it's not quite as easy as just the students, because remember that secondary, they get weighted at 1.2, they get that extra 20% the second. So it's really times the weighted students. And that equals your state revenue that you get, which is roughly, 80% of the revenues that school districts receive. Here's the same thing that Nancy had. You can see those formula allowances. That's those general ed aids. You'll see in Jeremy's not there yet. Sorry. You'll see in the last year it was 6,863. The current year is going up to the 7,138, which is that 4% that Nancy was talking about as an increase. Again, that's where the majority of our funds come from, is from the state. And then here's our October 1st student count. This isn't our end of the year count. So we are required to report to the state October 1st each year what our count is as of that day. As you can see, we were up to 22,958 right before COVID hit. And then we did take a decrease, during COVID, just like every school district did in the state. Actually, Big Lake, I think, lost 200 students that year. We actually only lost 100. And we've stayed stable kind of since then. We've been up, down a little bit, but again, as of October 1st. And again, these aren't our ending numbers. Those change at the end of the year. So how are our levies determined? As I stated earlier, I send the state a whole bunch of information in July and August, do some estimates on student counts, different items that we have to give them. But the legislature sets the formulas in statute. So that was those per student amounts that I just saw on that graph, that you saw on that graph. So legislature sets those. And it's how many ever students you have times that amount. That's the maximum. That Department of Ed, after I give them all those estimates, they calculate the formulas. They give us that, like I said, that 33-page report that they create. And then I get the totals, and then I bring them to you as a board to do the final levy certification tonight. And again, final levy can't exceed what the state sets. So the state actually sets the limits. As a district, you can't approve more than that. The only way you can go above that is if you do an operating referendum, which we do have two of them out there. So here's the actual proposed levies compared to the previous year. So our total levy In 22 pay 23 was 11,976,000. For the proposed levy for 23 pay 24, 12,386,000. An increase of 409,733, or a 3.42% increase. Most of the increase is in the general fund, and you'll see the different areas. I go through that here in a little bit. Next slide, actually. So the general fund had the 415,000 increase, 478. We had a reemployment levy increased by 70,000. That's just a result of, over those COVID years, we didn't really have any layoffs or people leaving. We now have started having some of those. Our referendum levies have increased by 277,000, and that's from the inflationary increase allowed, and then the state portion of the total per student allowance decreasing. So the state gives a total amount. Part of it is taxes, part of it gets paid by the state, but the state's portion has been going down. So then that means the levy portion to stay at the same dollar amount total, but that means then the tax levy goes up because the state portion that was covering part of it is going down. The long-term maintenance facilities levy increased 28,000. That was just, again, same thing, state lowering the aid portion of the revenue. Our building lease levy increased 27,000. And that's mainly from an adjustment through the co-op. We have a lease levy with them that we levy for and then turn it over to the co-op. And then slight increase in our OPEB levy, which is our other post-employment benefits. We're allowed to levy for those for retirees' insurance costs. And then there's 4 other categories, increased 3,779. And mostly those are enrollment adjustments between years. The community ed change was a 12,000 increase, mainly because of the increase. And this isn't just the student population, this is the whole district resident population is how they calculate the community ed levy. So because the population increased in our school boundaries, we have an increase of 11,316. The early childhood levy decreased because of a previous year's adjustment. And then the other community ed levies increased by 7,000. So some ups, some downs. Debt service levy. Here we had a decrease in our reduction in debt excess levy, and that again is that one where if we have too much fund balance in there, the state will reduce it so that we don't tax our residents as much. They have a formula they go through and they reduce. They say you have enough in reserves, so we're going to reduce it by this amount, and which is fine. We have enough in there. And then the other part, increase $516. Not a really big change there. So then how do they determine the property taxes, for those estimated statements that we all get in November? So first of all, the county assessors determines the market value for all the parcels. The legislature sets the formulas then of how much is taxed on those. And then the county auditor calculates that tax capacity for each of those parcels that individuals own. And then they put a rate to it of our school part, and then they combine it with all the other jurisdictions, the cities, if you live in a city or township, and then the county, and then there might be some special taxing, and then they add them all up, and that's what we get on our proposed property tax statements, which, again, we're just a part of that. There's other jurisdictions that are with that. Okay, and who can you contact for any answers or questions you got? It's me. There's my email or my phone number you can call. If you have questions about your property values, that's the Sherburne County Assessor's Office. And actually, they have a hearing in the spring. In May, if, you have a question on your valuing, that's when they hold their hearings. That's the presentation. Any questions? And I think I have the approval amount on the board meeting, or the agenda that you would need to approve. James.
3.42%,
Yep. Well, it's a dollar amount there too.
or $409,782.
It is, just a second, trying to get there. 12,386,628, the total.
You got that, okay. You want the dollar amount in there?
This year is
Yep, should just, so, okay,
good right on here.
yep. So then I'll make a motion to accept the truth of taxation proposal.
I'll second it. Questions or discussions on that? Well, number.
Numbers that.
Sorry.
Right.
Thanks, Kevin.
Lincoln, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Carries, brings us to item number 8, policy review. I think we have policy.
Dean, can I ask something?